I'm Sharon Poe, President of the Tuesday Women's Association of the Ethical Society, on the right-hand side of the screen up here. Our organization is dedicated to fostering nurturing relationships among women, fellowship, education, raising money for social causes, and having fun. You don't have to be a member of the Ethical Society to be a member of the Tuesday Women's Association. We are very much a sister organization with women's voices raised for social justice. We share the same goals and values. And now I want you to meet Linda Zaslon. Linda, who's going to tell you a little bit more about women's voices. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, and I want to echo Sharon's welcome tonight. We're happy to see all of you here, and I want to thank Sharon and the Tuesday Women's Association of the Ethical Society for co-sponsoring this event with us. And I also want to express our deep gratitude and thanks to our partners and supporters who made this event possible, and they are listed on the inside of your program. So when you have a chance, take a look at that. And tell you a little bit about Women's Voices. It's exciting. In 2020, Women's Voices will be celebrating its 15th anniversary. Started by 4 women over a couple of bottles of wine and a kitchen table, I believe in Maplewood. We've grown from 25 members to over 500 members to date and still growing. We have over 1,500 followers on Facebook. I'd like to give a shout out to one of the founding members who's here tonight, Barbara Finch. She's probably hiding in there she is in the back. If you're not already a member of Women's Voices, I'd encourage you to join your membership. Supports our education and advocacy, and also strengthens your voice and ours as we advocate to support public policies that will advance social justice. I want to also recognize our Common Sense Gun Solutions Committee and their Lock It for Love program. This was an innovative program that was started after the tragedy in Newtown, and they provide gun locks at community events in St. Louis City, county, and surrounding areas, and to date they've distributed over 5,000 gun locks, preventing many more deaths. One of our other areas of focus is our Racial Justice Committee, which is a very large and active committee. That committee is dedicated to identifying ways that we can help eradicate systemic racism, and I'd like to recognize those committee chairs, Barbara Finch and Nancy Wicks. This event is also was worked on by our Racial Justice Committee, and I want to give a special thanks to Lisi Bernstein, to our one of our past presidents, who spent countless hours organizing and coordinating this event. So, thank you. To introduce our speakers tonight. Thank you.
My name is Nancy Wicks, and I co-chair. I'm like the super minor co-chair standing next to our hero, Barb Finch, organizing our Racial Justice Committee. And it probably won't surprise any of you to hear that it was a little over 4 years ago when, although racial justice had always been one of our priorities, it really moved to the front and center. And we've spent an awful lot of effort both educating and activating our own members, but also the broader community about the dismal state of racial equity in the St. Louis region. We've done things like book studies and evening programs and lunch and learns and a trip to Memphis to the museums and important historical sites that are there. And we've written letters to the editor and so much more. And we certainly acknowledge the frustration and the hurt and the anger that many of us across the racial spectrum feel about living in an area that unfortunately is famous across the country for all the wrong reasons. And on the other hand, there's a real silver lining to that in a way. And that is the increasing spotlight that has been shining on members of our own community here in St. Louis who are doing amazing, amazing work toward racial justice and equity. And I know many of you are in the room tonight, and we certainly salute you for all that work. And yeah, by all means. But it's a special kind of exciting when we see some of our local leaders and local voices suddenly go on to share their brilliance on the national stage. And our speaker tonight is a perfect example of that. You already know her background. I won't go into every detail, but there's Teach for America, and there's activism around Ferguson, and the podcast, and the book that's coming, and the Harvard Fellowship, and the TED Talk. And if that's not enough for you, there's more on the back of your program if you haven't already read it. We built this evening as a candid conversation with Brittany Packnett. But if you look around you, you will realize that there are a few too many of us to fit around anybody's coffee table. So we have, in a sense, deputized Shirley Washington, a Fox News anchor and host of the program Pulse of St. Louis, to engage with Brittany on our behalf. However, you are not out of the loop. If you look inside your program, you'll find a little 3x5 card. So as you're listening to the conversation this evening, if you find yourself saying, boy, I wish they'd ask her, fill in the blank, you just fill it in on your own blank card, and a little later in the program, we'll have volunteers coming up and down the aisles to collect those and pass them along to Brittany as well. So enough from me. I am turning the program over to Shirley and to Brittany Packnett.
Good evening. Good evening. All right, I want to make sure you guys are here. I'm Shirley Washington, and I am honored to be here with you this evening. I am looking forward to the conversation because, as you know, Ms. Packnett is a phenomenal speaker. And so I'm excited about the conversation. And those of you who have watched the Pulse of St. Louis, you know I love to talk. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk. So how are you, Brittany?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be home. It's a holiday, the blues one.
Yes.
It's especially a day to be home, but it's always fantastic to be back in St. Louis.
And you are home, so give me a sense of what it was like for you growing up in St. Louis.
Growing up in St. Louis was magical and confusing in all of the ways that childhood ever is. Magical in that as I got older, I realized the incredible caliber of hero that I was able to interface with as a child. So I got to know people like Frankie Freeman and James Cole Papa Bell as a child, and you know, your living idols, living history are right there in your living room. I was raised by two folks who I am forever indebted for teaching me the importance of both policy and protest. I think my mom is here somewhere. Hey, Mom. And you know, I tell this story often because I'm so incredibly proud of my mother. But my mother became a widow in her 40s, a PhD in her 50s, and an ordained minister in her 60s. And so there was never a question about what's possible for me. I didn't have to look far for heroes. I didn't have to look far for role models. And so in so many ways, St. Louis was magical and powerful and beautiful. And then there were also times that it was deeply confusing. Driving from North County, where I grew up, all the way to up the street from here in Ladue to go to school, and watching the neighborhood change, watching the zip codes go by and the opportunity and the access change along with it, learning what the Del Mar Divide was, not by reading it in a paper, by visiting friends that live on either side of the divide, and by going to church on one side and going to school on the other side. Knowing full well that there is a status quo in this city with which people are very comfortable. And the moments where I found myself on the side of challenging that status quo, being met with so much opposition and so much fear. Those times were things that I had to make sense of growing up. And so you're growing up in this place that gives you Ted Drews and Cardinals baseball, but that also gives you segregation. And reconciling that as a young person, as a black person, as a black woman, was formative, certainly, but I think about all of the young people that are riding up and down our streets and in our classrooms and walking through our malls and in our theaters every single day in this community, and thinking about how we can make sure that they get more of the beauty and less of the confusion.
What made you fearful growing up?
So interestingly, a couple of things made me fearful. One was the fact that we had the talk in our household, just like so many other black families in this community. When I turned 16, I'm about to date myself, but when I turned 16, my mother said, and I started driving back 45 minutes to school, she said, if you ever get pulled over, I don't care how many minutes you have on your phone. There were no unlimited plans then, people. I don't care how many minutes you have on your phone. You call me and you leave the phone on speaker until you are done. The first time I ever remember being faced with police violence, my brother was 5, I was 9, and my brother and my late father were driving in a car that the police were convinced could not have actually belonged to my dad. He was in, I want to say it was Belle Noire or Belle Reeve, one of these tiny municipalities that was right next to Ferguson. And he was pulled over, snatched out of the car, thrown up against the hood of the car. My brother's 5 years old and sitting in the back seat screaming and crying. My father comes home irate, my brother comes home scared, and the fear that I saw in my brother's eyes was something that I never ever want to see in the eyes of another person that I love. And so this idea that the folks that are supposed to serve and protect me, like I learned in school, are actually not doing that depending on who you are and where you live and what you drive and what your zip code is, that certainly created a level of fear in me. And it is fear that we continue to see. So I remember, I would say it was about 2014, it was a few weeks after Michael Brown Jr. was killed. I was in my office at Teach for America with one of our teachers who was there because we had community space in the back of the office that I created. And a lot of our teachers would come and they would tutor their students. And so one of my teachers had 3 of her students with her. All of them were young black men. And she was in my office with them because they had just seen a police officer outside. And 2 of the students hid behind their teacher, who was a white woman, and they said, I need you to protect me. So all these years later, where I'm seeing the same fear in another young person's eyes, who could have been my brother, who could have been Michael Brown Jr., who could have been Von Garrett Myers, who could have been Eugene Powell. And so I think my greatest fear, actually, is that we won't ever come to full grips with the power and possibility that exists in this community because we are too weighed down by our problems. And that would just be our greatest shame. Like, I just don't know if we really have reckoned with the stuff that we are made of in St. Louis. Like the story of Margaret Bush Wilson, right? The stories of John Barry Meacham and Mary Meacham, who helped people cross into freedom across the Mississippi River, and she and her husband created a floating freedom school because it was illegal to teach black children to read and write in Missouri, but the Mississippi River was free territory, right? We come from that ingenuity. We come from Dred Scott. We come from all of these people who are creative and tenacious and willing to lay it down on the line for freedom. And my fear is that we will never fully grasp the power that is within us to create a St. Louis that actually works for all of us. My greatest hope, though, in prayer is that we absolutely will seize that power, and then I won't ever have to see that kind of fear in another young person's eyes.
Let's talk about the day that Michael Brown Jr. was shot and killed. Where were you, and when and how did you get the news?
I was in Kansas City with my mom. Mom, do you want to come up here? Because I feel like all these stories are just going to be you and me. She said, next time. We'll work on it next time. So we were in Kansas City, and we went together as kind of a mini vacation. My mother went to William Jewell College, so it was right by Kansas City. And I was asked to speak at a conference for girls, high school age girls. And my keynote was all about confidence and leadership, commitment. And I stood in front of them and told them that we needed them to work hard today so that they could be leaders for tomorrow. This was my platform. So later on that evening, we went home, we went to the hotel rather, kind of relaxed. The plan the next day was to go to all of her old haunts, to get some Gates barbecue, to go to the campus and do all the fun things. But I got on Instagram and I saw a picture of a man in a sleeveless tank top standing on the street holding a cardboard sign that said, "The Ferguson Police Department just killed my unarmed son." It was Michael Brown Jr.'s stepdad. And I started flipping the channels on the TV. Nobody was talking about it. So I did what millennials know to do when we need the news. I got on Twitter. And sure enough, Twitter was talking about it, specifically young black folks from this community who had gone outside to demand answers. And so suddenly I was starting to see these images of more people with cardboard signs. I started to see people lined up and down Canfield Drive. The next morning I saw a picture that was taken by the Post-Dispatch of peaceful, frustrated, but peaceful black protesters standing face to face with police officers and German shepherds. And if you had put that picture in black and white, you would have thought it was 1964 instead of 2014. And I woke my mother up, it was early in the morning, I said, "Look, I don't exactly understand fully what's happening, we have to go home." And she was like, is there a meeting? Is there, what exactly are we going home for? I said, "I don't know, but I can't be here." And I couldn't be there because I felt this terrible pain in my stomach realizing that I had lied to every one of those girls that I had spoken to. Because I told them that they needed to work hard today to be leaders for tomorrow, but this moment was calling for their leadership right now, right? Like the history was calling for their leadership, their voice, their courage right now. And in order to pay for the sin of telling them that lie, I had to go home. So it was August 10th that morning. I found out that there was going to be a vigil in front of the Ferguson Police Department. I made it right at the end of the vigil, but the vigil turned into a protest. And so folks started to sit in the streets, and I'm still trying to survey the space. So I go to the Aldi's. Now, all my Ferguson protesters, y'all know exactly which Aldi's I'm talking about. There's an Aldi's right around the corner from the police department. So I went to Aldi's, I bought a bunch of water, because I'm like trying to figure out exactly what's going on. But I know if people are sitting in the street, then they need to stay hydrated, because who knows how long we'll be here. And that day I took video because I just wanted to bear witness. I wanted to make sure that people didn't mistake what was happening in this place. That this is not a group of undisciplined, angry people. That this is a group of very disciplined, angry people. And I watched a young woman very clearly explain to the former deputy police chief of Ferguson exactly why folks were so angry. Because she said it's never you or the folks who look like you that end up in this situation. It's always me, it's my brothers, it's my uncles, it's my aunts. And so you have to understand why I don't have regard for that uniform, because that uniform doesn't have any regard for me. And he quieted himself, he stepped back, he stood next to me, and I said, "Why did you bring out German shepherds in a black community knowing the history of degradation and harm?" And he looked at me and he said, "Well, did anybody die?" And I thought to myself, if that is your standard, that's exactly why we have to be out here. And actually, somebody did die. His name's Michael Brown Jr. And we're not going home until A, we've got answers about that, and B, that there are no more Michael Brown Jr.'s. Someone asked me to go inside to have a meeting with some community leaders and the police chief. I said, no, I'm gonna stay out here with the people because there's nothing that police chief can tell me that's going to be relevant to the work that needs to be done. So that was my first day in protest in what became the Ferguson Uprising. I was out there with thousands of other people who are never on the radio, who never get asked to do events like this, but who are and will always be a critical factor in the fabric of this country, reminding each one of us of our responsibility and our duty as citizens. I heard Stephen Bradley, who's a professor at SLU, say that young people in Ferguson saved American democracy because folks were asleep. Folks thought when we got a black guy in the White House, and that St. Louis was a place where everything was fine. That folks stayed in their corners, nobody ever really got in conflict, and everybody got along. But what occurred in Ferguson was a revealing of who we've been for a very long time. And I am deeply privileged to have been not only a part of that moment, but have witnessed the creation of a movement that we have seen ripple across this entire country.
Give us a sense of why you were demonstrating, for those who may not know.
That's a great question. One, I was partially demonstrating because my parents would have been disappointed in me if I didn't. I was raised by two ministers, and the Jesus that I knew was a Jesus that flipped tables, right? That they got mad at tax collectors, right? That hung out with poor people. That's the Jesus I know. That's the Jesus I was trained to emulate. So the idea that you could see a problem and not assume proximity to it and not assume responsibility to solve it was unacceptable in my household. So my first protest, we were in strollers. I remember being in elementary school and protesting with my father and some of his church members and other folks to get Black Santas in the Galleria. And we got Black Santas in the Galleria. So there was a tradition in which I was raised. So it was second nature, frankly, to just wake my mom up and say, we have to go home. It was second nature to go out on the street. It was second nature to say, I need to come back again and again and again until we figure this thing out. But we were out there because a young man named Michael Brown Jr. had been unarmed and walking in his own neighborhood and killed by a police officer named Darren Wilson. But we were out there primarily because there are Michael Brown Jr.'s all across this country. There's Eric Garner and Amadou Diallo, there's Sandra Bland. And what a lot of people don't remember is that there were 6 more people killed by St. Louis police in the next 6 months in the city and the county, unarmed. The other thing that a lot of people don't remember is that it was 400 days of direct, sustained action. A lot of people think that we came out, were loud on bullhorns for a weekend, and then everybody went home. That is not how this happened. 400 days of sustained direct action makes the Ferguson Uprising the longest direct action campaign in this country's history. It's longer than the Montgomery bus boycott. And what we were doing is precisely what Dr. King talks about in a letter from a Birmingham jail. We were creating the crisis to force power structures to answer. So when we were out on West Florissant, when we were interrupting city council meetings and county council meetings, when we were doing die-ins in the loop, when we were shutting down malls on Black Friday, what we were saying to people is that life as we know it cannot continue until this systemic crisis is answered, until Ferguson no longer has an all-white city council, until children are not walking in their own neighborhoods and fearful from the people who are supposed to serve and protect them, until we stop seeing more and more hashtags come because more and more people are being killed. So what we were fundamentally saying is that until this system affirms our blackness and our existence, we will not rest. And that work absolutely continues.
You served under the Ferguson Commission. Tell me about what you gained from being a part of that group and what was learned.
The Ferguson Commission was fascinating. I don't think I've ever told this story. I remember being upstairs in the Missouri History Museum in Forest Park. And this was the day in November where the formation and membership of the commission was going to be announced. And our former governor, who lots of us felt was not doing a great job with this crisis, shall we say, came upstairs to greet us all, because technically we were all appointees of the governor. And he came upstairs with a camera crew. And I was like, what is this about? I had joined the Ferguson Commission primarily because two people, Rich McClure and Starsky Wilson, were very clear that this was not going to be another Ryan Commission. What they said to me and the other 14 members of the commission was that they had read the books on why Ryan commissions, as they're so-called, failed. Why we can look at the report of the Carter Commission 50 plus years later and see the exact same circumstances right now. And what they wanted to create was a deeply, inclusively democratic process that pulled people in from all across this region, for all of us to take collective responsibility in reckoning with what brought us to this crisis and figuring out the solutions to get us out of it. That is the ideal that I was committed to. That is why I signed up for a thing that some people said, don't sign up for because all this is going to do is break up the protest. I said very clearly to the folks from the governor's office who offered me the role, if the expectation is that I stop protesting, then I'm going to say no. Because everything that I'm hearing on the line of protest is precisely what I need to be bringing to the Ferguson Commission. These ideas, these wants, these hopes, these dreams. They assured me that that was not the plan, so I said I would join. But here comes the governor on the day of the announcement with a camera crew. So I distinctly remember only posing, they were taking pictures while he was greeting people, and I've met the governor a few times, and so, he leans in to hug me, and I give this very stiff hug with no expression on my face, and I'm like, you're not gonna wanna publish this picture. Because I didn't want this to turn into a photo op. I just did not want this to turn into a congratulatory moment for an elected official, when actually what this symbolized was the beginning of the hardest work that we will have ever taken on as a community, if we choose to take it on. And so that time was revealing. We decided to take the meetings all across this region because we didn't want anybody to think that this was a Ferguson problem, that it was located and specific to one community. This is all of our issue. So we had meetings in Claytonville, we had meetings on the south side, we had meetings on the north side, we had meetings in Ferguson, we had meetings in St. Charles, because we said just because you're across the river doesn't mean you're exempt. So I experienced that level of intentionality that taught me some really important things about having people at the table from day one and making sure that the way that we design our community is fully inclusive. It's one thing to have elite folks create a plan for the rest of the community and then try to sell it to us. That wasn't shade any particular plan, I'm just saying. It's another thing to build a table where the St. Louis that exists is actually reflected at that table, and the people most affected by our greatest challenges are the ones who are leading the design process. And we tried to create a process where the most affected were leading the design process. I'll never forget a meeting that was what we called the Youth Speak. And everybody who spoke was between the ages of 18 and 24. I was the only person over the age of 24 that spoke the entire meeting because I gave a welcome. The rest of the meeting, I was taking notes from small groups of young people that were talking about solutions. At every single meeting we had, we gave a short time for open comments. We didn't give a bunch of commentary from the commission. We spent most of our time in small group activity. And in those small group activities, we asked people two questions. What is your lived experience with whatever issue is on the table? Police violence, education, economic mobility. What is your lived experience? Because that is important data, just like numbers and statistics are. And two, what are the solutions that you propose? So if you go to Ferguson right now, what you will see are the stories of the folks who have been affected and the solutions that came directly from our community. And now we see organizations and organizers across this region taking their piece and saying, okay, if this is a solution from the community, we've got the talent and the resources to help solve the housing piece. We've got the talent and the resources to work on the education piece. We've got the talent and the resources to work on the policing piece. So now everybody's taking up their yoke and doing their part. Was it a perfect process? No, because we learn as we go along. But fundamentally, people want to have the power of decision-making in the things that affect them. And I think that we did our level best to operate in that way. And I think it set a model of what's possible, not only in this region, but across the country.
Do you think that improvements have been made in the St. Louis region in light of your efforts?
I mean,
Of the commission?
you know, when you say your efforts, I'm thinking of literally thousands of people. I'm thinking of the fact that we have a new prosecutor in St. Louis County. All of those folks that were, I want to be fundamentally clear, all of the people who were being called thugs on the news, those were the folks knocking on doors and getting signatures and getting people out to vote for us. There is a relentlessness that exists among people in St. Louis, and especially marginalized people in St. Louis, that says, no matter what you say about me, it is always the time to do what is right. And so I think that we have seen progress, right? The city council is not all white anymore. Wes LaBelle is in office. Our city defenders continues to pursue a great number of critical lawsuits, everything from municipal governance to school board governance. But I still see, I think we all still see a great amount of work that needs to be done. Inez ran this button to me because I wanted to make sure if you saw me, you also saw Close the Workhouse.
Why is it important, why is it critical to you that the workhouse is closed?
The workhouse is not just a symbol of oppression. It is a literal monument to oppression every single day. 90% of the people in the workhouse are pretrial detainees. It means they have not been found guilty of any single crime, and yet they're being jailed every day. They're not being given proper medical attention. They are existing in conditions that we would not wish on our worst enemies. Rats, mice, toilets that overflow, food that should not be eaten by anyone. 47% of St. Louis City is black, but 8 times as many detainees in the workhouse are black as are white. If we can't close the workhouse, if we cannot look at this monument of daily oppression and say this should never happen on our watch with 16 million of our tax dollars every single year, then we should all pack it up and go home. There are just some things that are right and there are some things that are wrong. And stealing labor from our neighbors and fellow citizens in order to sustain profits for folks who take no interest and make no investment in communities is something that we should be clear is fundamentally wrong. Summers ago, detainees in the workhouse were literally screaming out of the windows because the temperatures in the workhouse ranged from 90 degrees to 125 degrees. In the middle of a St. Louis summer. Now, we don't know how hot a St. Louis summer is without privilege, when we can get in a car or turn on an air conditioner or go to a home that is not overflowing with feces and actually have the kind of relief that we need in these hot St. Louis summers. But here you are expected to live and sustain a life that way while you are giving your basically free labor to the state of Missouri. It is completely unacceptable. It is a human rights violation. We should all be ashamed that it exists in our city. There's a woman named Layleen Polanco, a trans woman who just died in Rikers Island last week because she couldn't afford $500 bail. $500 bail. Rikers Island is no different than the workhouse. And everyone wants to talk about what's happening in New York City, and we should, but those kinds of atrocities are happening right here in what other people call flyover country, but what we have to actually pay attention to. And we owe our neighbors their humanity. Like we do. There, but by the grace of God, know why. That could be any one of us living in that circumstance, trying to exist in that circumstance, fighting to get back to our families, fighting to get back to our homes, fighting to get back to our jobs. And we could be caught there because we can't afford $250, $500. We could be caught there because of a system of inequity that persists in this city that declares that some have to be haves and some have to be have-nots. It is an absolute atrocity. We should all be ashamed that its doors are open, and we should all be doing every single thing that we do to close the workhouse as a beginning to the work of equity in the city.
A federal judge just this week ruled that detainees cannot be held because they cannot afford bail. Is that a step in the right direction?
It is absolutely a step in the right direction, but it is a step, right? So cash bail, money bail is a deeply flawed system across this country. It essentially criminalizes poverty, and we've been criminalizing people for conditions that we created and that we benefit from, right? So it's a disgusting cycle. So it is a step in the right direction, but the broader conversation has to be how we remove the incentive for profit from somebody's incarceration altogether. And that is not just about money bail, right? That is also about court fines and fees. That is also about the excessive policing that we experience in so many of our Black and brown communities because folks want to raise their revenue off of our backs. That is also about making sure that companies are not incentivized to make their products in places like the workhouse. That means we don't buy coffee from the places that get their coffee cups from there, right? It is a step in the right direction, but the fundamental, cash bail is a symptom. The fundamental virus is greed, because we can essentially take people's free labor while they are incarcerated and make profit off of them. If we remove the incentive for profit, we can remove the incentive for the system to exist.
And then how do we change the system? Because what's currently happening is not working.
That's right. As well, it's not working for us, right? What we have to get clear about is it's working for some people. That's why it exists. We often call systems broken that are not broken, that they are functioning exactly as they were designed. We talk about mass incarceration and criminal injustice. We talk about education, when we talk about housing, when we talk about healthcare. These things are working exactly as they were designed. For the people that have privilege and have wealth, they can access everything that they need. For the people that don't, they can't, and they become subservient to the people that can. Their subjugation serves the folks with privilege, right? So it is working for some folks, it's not working for the rest of us. So the first thing that we have to do is be very clear about exactly what the flaw is. We keep letting people off the hook by having conversations that aren't systemic. You know, when I started doing a lot of work in policing, I ended up on President Obama's policing task force, and we traveled all over the country, and people just wanted to say, well, community policing is a solution. You need to get back on the beat, you need to know your neighbors, you need to know the people in the community, get out there, play basketball, serve some ice cream. Listen, I don't want your rocky road, I want you not to kill me, right? You shouldn't have to know my child to see them as a human being. Yeah. There are systemic issues at play of not just internal and individual bias, but systemic bias, right? There is a system that depends on the subjugation of certain people in certain neighborhoods, and therefore there are entire systems and strategies of policing that were built on that system. But we keep letting people get off the hook talking about ice cream and bad apples. No, I'm not talking about a bad apple. I'm talking about a barrel that was made from rotten wood, right? So the first step is that we have a fundamentally honest conversation about the flaws in this system and never let the system off the hook. Because too many people think that it's just about having a nice conversation with your neighbor, and that's a start, but that's not all there is. I think the second thing that we have to do, though, is actually play the long game when it comes to policy. I was talking with Louisan in the car on the way over here about how many people are disengaged with the action of voting, right? It feels like we've told people, well, your vote will set you free, and then suddenly they're still in shackles and we're wondering why they don't believe in the system of voting anymore. Well, because it didn't set them free like we said it would. What we should actually have been telling people was your vote is a single tool in a larger toolbox, and then equipping people to use that entire toolbox. So yes, vote for the person that you want, and then recognize that you still have to hold that person accountable. So after you voted for them and they get in office, show up to that city council meeting, show up to that fire and police meeting, show up to that alderperson's meeting, take on the issues that you want, gather your neighbors to do the same thing, protest, knock on people's doors, get the signatures that you need to hold them accountable to the things that they promised you they would do when they asked for your vote. And then once that's done, move on to the next piece. There is a long-term game that we have to play, because a lot of folks will just wait us out. A lot of folks will say, well, I'll be in Congress for so long, and by the time I'm, chair of X committee, you will have run out of steam. I was with one of the co-founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee a few years ago, and what he told me has always stuck with me. He said, the will of the enemy is not to kill you. The will of the enemy is to kill your will to resist. That actually the idea is I'm supposed to tire you out so much that I can just wait you out, and then continue to do the thing that I was going to do in your name. And so we have to be willing to be strategic, disciplined over the long haul, and know that each piece to the puzzle can add up to something if we actually stick with it.
We've been dealing with tremendous tragedy in St. Louis this week. We lost 4 children in 5 days. What thoughts run through your mind when you hear that? 4 children, ages 3, 11, and 2 are 16. We've lost them to gun violence.
My fiance is also from St. Louis. We met at a protest, which is very on brand for me. He's from the South Side. He lives in DC now. But when I saw this article about the latest young person that had been killed, it's already June. And when you grow up in St. Louis, especially when you grow up living in and experiencing so many of our communities, we know that the summer is the most dangerous time. What we say is the block is hot, right? Like it's dangerous out there. So I texted him this article and I said, the block is already hot and it's not even June 15th. So I'm experiencing a great deal of fear right now because I do not want the rest of the summer in St. Louis to be predicted by what the summer has already been in St. Louis. But the challenges around gun violence are systemic, they are broad, and they are deep. Anytime anybody offers you a single solution to something, you should look the other way. You should run the other way, actually. Because it's not just about locking up all the guns, right? That is definitely part of it, and gun safety is critically important, and this is a piece of the puzzle. But what we fundamentally have to talk about is why our communities are so unhealthy that crime persists in the first place. If solutions to gun violence, justice solutions to criminal justice do not include education, housing, healthcare, and employment, then they will always be insufficient. We will always keep having the same problems. We will keep coming back to the same circumstance summer after summer, year after year, and St. Louis will continue to have a murderous reputation around this entire country. If you give people jobs and pay them living wages, they don't have to engage in the kind of crime of lack to put food on the table, right? If you put people in housing that actually sustains their lives and doesn't make them and their children sick, then they are able to make fundamentally different choices. If you invest in the economy of the hood in such a way that people can have ownership of their space, of their block, of their house, they have a fundamentally different attitude toward taking care of that thing. But if they don't have access to the capital and they were redlined out of their community 50 years ago and can't do that, then we can't have that conversation. So I know that there are immediate needs, right? And the work of people like Women's Voices and Better Family Life are there taking care of those immediate needs. While the folks who are courageous and brave and brilliant are taking care of those immediate needs, it is the responsibility of the rest of us to force our lawmakers and our policymakers to be having the long-term, nuanced, complicated conversation of how to actually create healthy communities in this region.
Talk about that trauma that children go through, that toxic stress that they have to deal with day in and day out because of situations like this in their neighborhoods where they should be safe.
That's right. Someone tweeted the other day that there are entire generations of children of color and low-income children who have grown up with PTSD that nobody has ever diagnosed. This is unnatural to see people, your classmates, your friends being killed at 4 and 5 years old. And that's not an exaggeration because one of the young people who was killed in the last Sundays was 3 and the other one was 4, right? It is unnatural to be 16 years old and be wondering if you'll make it to 17, wondering if you can even consider college because you don't know if you're going to live that long. We have to be honest about how deeply traumatic that is, about how no young person should be living in that circumstance. And what we see is because of the trauma that is inflicted, and then on the other end, the lack of access to mental health care and other health care supports, that young people are growing into older people who are walking around with that trauma every single day. It is part of the reason why in education we have started to speak critically about culturally responsive teaching and trauma-informed care. That I have to know and value who you are as a young person in order to teach you effectively. And then once I do that, I have to care about your pain such that I can help you acknowledge it and help you turn it into your power so that you can actually persist with all the challenges that will come your way. But a lot of that starts in school. What that means is that we can't get re-traumatize our young people when they walk into our school building. So if I walk in and I'm first greeted not by a teacher, not by a parent, not by a principal, but by an officer and a metal detector, I'm continuing to internalize A, that other people think I'm a criminal just because of the way I look in the zip code I grew up in. And I'm internalizing B, that I will never be safe. I will never be safe. No, listen. Maybe I talk too much about business. I went to high school with people who did hard illicit drugs every single day. But because I went to private school, I never saw a police officer, not once. No football games, no basketball games, certainly not every day when I walked into the building. We assume a level of criminality about poor black and brown children in this country that says, well, you have to have a police officer, otherwise people won't be safe. When the truth of the matter is we are adding to the trauma that they are already experiencing out on the street in the place where they should be the safest, the schoolhouse. So, yes, teachers and educators have to be armed with the tools of trauma-informed care and culturally responsive pedagogy, but we also need our systems to respond by creating environments where kids experience joy, where they experience love, where they experience creativity, where they can test the boundaries and fall on a soft landing and not be treated like criminals when they're simply going to learn.
Tonight, but I do have someone who's keeping time. So I've got one more question,
okay,
and then we're going to take questions from the audience. Talk to me about the importance of confidence.
Yes. So you must have seen my TikTok.
Yes.
I believe that confidence is an essential ingredient in anything. Right? If we think about the world's most successful people, Steve Jobs had a lot of confidence to think that you can put thousands of hours of music on this tiny thing, right? You have to have confidence to believe the impossible is possible. And I think that we are missing out on so many possibilities because the people with some of the brightest ideas lack the confidence to go execute on them. That's because we socialize certain people to have a lot of confidence, and we socialize other people that their confidence is ugly, or that it's a threat, or that it's unwarranted. So if you grow up in a certain zip code, you're not supposed to have any confidence. If you're a woman, your confidence makes you too masculine. If you are a person of color, your confidence is seen as a threat, right? The truth of the matter is everyone deserves to operate as their most confident selves. And I want to dare us to imagine what the world can look like if every single one of us, folks with disabilities, LGBTQ folks, people of color, tall folks, short folks, fat folks, skinny folks, and everyone actually walked around and entered every day with a level of confidence that says this thing I can dream can actually be true, how different the world would look. Like, what diseases would we have cured already? What systemic issues would we have solved, right? What creations could we have made that we're missing out on because we tell some people that they don't deserve confidence? I think that confidence is something that we tell a lot of people, go be more confident. We don't think about our collective responsibility to create communities where people can try on confidence and actually achieve in that way, right? So it's collective responsibility to create a confident society. And I think that, I did this at TED this year, and the person before me talked about some great discovery in medicine. The person after me talked about discovering like a whole new galaxy. And I was like, my talk is just on confidence. But think about how confident those people had to be to go discover a whole new galaxy. It's a basic ceiling, right? It is one of those basic building blocks that I think we skip over because we think it's a soft skill, and I want us to pay some attention to it.
Awesome. All right. I think we're going to take time now to take questions. Okay, if you can pass your cards and I think forward to E.
Just to the aisles.
Oh, to the others. Okay, we will collect the cards and then we will pose your questions to Brittany.
Here's a couple to get started with.
Thank you so much.
Shirley, can I read your handwriting?
No, Shirley did put her contact lenses in there, she can't read. Can you read that one?
Let's see. Oh no, I see why you're having trouble. Hold on.
Okay, let's do this one.
Okay.
We touched on this in the course of the conversation. The question is this: how do you think we are doing in St. Louis after the Ferguson Commission report? Any progress?
As was shared before, I do think that there's progress. I think there's a question on the back that's easier to read. We can do that one. I do think that there is in progress. I think that the question for us is that are we going to give up at the first or second step, right? It's interesting. Next time Martin Luther King Day rolls around, just sit and watch. Because we'll go to interfaith services, we'll march down to Powell Hall, folks will give fiery speeches and fiery sermons, and everybody will feel like they have been to the mountaintop. What they're really experiencing is this self-congratulatory nostalgia that says, my God, we're not where we used to be, so pat yourself on the back, you took a day off, you made some sandwiches and put them in some baggies for some housing insecure folks, and you did it, and now we'll see you again next year, right? I think sometimes we get too comfortable in the small wins and don't stay and stick around for the longer wins. The existence of the Ferguson Commission, the existence of Forward with Ferguson is not in and of itself the win. The win is whether or not we get everything done that was in that report, and then people have the stamina, wherewithal, and have learned the lessons to go and do the next 50 things, right? That's actually going to be the win. So have we made progress? Yes. Is the work done? Not by long shot.
All right. Okay, I think I can read this one now.
Okay.
This one says, what do you know about the city's consideration of treating crime as a disease and the funding they want to use for programs that are modeled in other cities? What is your opinion?
Crime is a public health crisis, right? And there is something to be said about the reframing of the conversation in order to move people to action. Here's a perfect example of that. As soon as the opioid crisis began to impact white, suburban, middle-class communities, and the conversation was about a public health crisis and not about an individual's criminality or bad choices, suddenly we see government throwing money at the issue, nonprofits throwing money at the issue, corporations throwing money at the issue. Reframing the problem is a part of the solution, right? It is often the first step to actually getting people to invest in creating solutions about it. So this is the first that I've heard of is cure violence.
That's happened the day before yesterday.
So this is the first I've heard of it, and I appreciate the additional information and education. But most certainly, understanding violence as a public health threat to all of us will hopefully actually position us to create humane solutions to the issue. Thanks for that question.
Okay, here's another question for you. What is the advice you can give to your white allies?
Why'd you make that face?
I love this question. I think it's a great question.
It is a great question, and I get this question often. So a few things.
We only have 30 minutes.
Okay. One is see becoming an ally as a first step. See your aspiration as becoming an accomplice and then a co-conspirator. Here's what I mean by that. An ally shows up when it is convenient. An accomplice shows up when there is a risk. A co-conspirator decides to go into the risk proactively because they helped create the plan in the first place. There have to be levels to this thing if you are going to participate for a lifetime. So my first piece of advice is to be cool with being an ally, but be committed to becoming fully a co-conspirator. The second is to understand fundamentally what your work is. There is, I'm trying to remember who said it and I can't remember, but someone said if you are trying to help out on an issue that you don't know about, listen for a year before you go and engage. And then when you do go engage, ask permission from the community that is most affected by that problem to be engaged. Often we come with an unintentional savior complex that says, I've got the education, I've got the money, I've got the background, I've got the professional experience, so of course you want my help. Of course I know better than you. Of course I can set the agenda and then expect you to follow it. That is a surefire recipe for disaster. It is a surefire recipe to actually enact more harm than you do good, because you are using your privilege to silence the very people who should be leading the work. All the time in education, when we talk about educational inequity, my leaders are not these really great people who went to Harvard Business School and have a plan. My leaders are students. My leaders are parents. My leaders are influencers of students who day in and day out experience the trauma of schools, experience what schools do right and what schools do wrong. And if the vision that they have has a role for me, then it is my job to go and play that role. So listen crucially, listen carefully, and recognize that your work is not to go and drown anybody out, silence anybody, or stand in the front. That often your work is to resource the people who are most affected, let them set the agenda, and let them dictate your role. It can be difficult, because that means you have to move your ego out of the way, but that is the necessary work. Beverly Daniel Tatum, who used to be the president of Spelman College, is a really fascinating illustration for this. And she talks about a moving walkway. She talks about oppression, racism, any kind of systemic oppression you can think of as a moving walkway. And on this moving walkway, there are four groups of people. The first group of people are the people who are running in the direction of the moving walkway. These people benefit from the system of oppression. They do not question or interrogate the system of oppression because it makes them comfortable, it preserves their privilege. They have no interest in dismantling. Those folks are, you know, that guy in the White House. That's the people in group number one. Group number two are folks who realize this moving walkway is actually moving in a pretty terrible direction. So I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna run, I'm gonna walk. And I'm not gonna enthusiastically move in the direction of oppression, but I'm not really going to do a whole lot to turn around or convince other people to turn around either. Those are the people who passively are, those are the folks who are tacitly raised. Those are the folks who think they're giving me a compliment when they tell me I'm articulate. As if it's a surprise. And you know my mama, she is smart, so am I. So that is group number two, right? Group number three are folks who realize, you know what, this is going in the wrong direction. This is terrible, I'm gonna turn around. And they're standing still. They're turned around on the walkway, but they're standing still. They're not doing anything to create an oppositional force to start to move the walkway in the other direction, right? The aspiration has to always be in group four. The people who start to walk, crawl, run, jog as fast and as hard as they can in the other direction, and get other people to do the same, start getting other people to turn around and say, run with me in this other, we don't want what's over there, we want what's back, we want what's over here. Those folks can create the collective oppositional force that actually moves things in the other direction. That requires you to be honest with the other white people in your life. That requires you to take all of that information that you have read in those good books and that you have gotten from these informative meetings and share with other people, some of whom are like-minded and some of whom are not. Some of whom are going to like your post on Facebook and some of whom are going to want to argue with you. Being unafraid of the backlash that you will get for being honest about the way that things are is one of the risks that you're going to have to take if you actually want to be not just a good white ally, but a good white accomplice and co-conspirator. Because the risk that you are taking pales in comparison to the risk that marginalized people face every single day. So you have to make the decision to see the challenge and go toward it. So aim to be an accomplice and then a co-conspirator. Be willing to do the hard work and run in the opposite direction. And be willing to recognize that your work is not actually to be in front, but to be behind, beneath, below, supporting the work and pushing others forward.
Do you encourage your white allies to watch any particular documentaries or films?
That was a good leading question. I see what you did there. Lots of them, right? You know, there's kind of a starter pack, if you will. You should start reading Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde and Michelle Alexander and Ta-Nehisi Coates. You should know more Martin Luther King Jr. texts than just the I Have a Dream speech. In particular, read Where Do We Go From Here? And his Beyond Vietnam speech. You should look at your current library, and that could be your Netflix library, your actual library at home, the stack of books, and you should audit all of the voices and perspectives that are missing. If everyone on your bookshelf is straight, then you need to go read some queer authors. If everyone on your bookshelf is Christian, then you need to go read some folks who are not religious, who are Muslim, who are Buddhist. You need to go and get that perspective. So that's number one. Specifically right now, though, I'm encouraging everyone to go and watch When They See Us. When They See Us is a 4-part film on Netflix about the Central Park now exonerated 5 young men who were falsely accused, charged, and found guilty of raping a woman in Central Park in the early 90s. And
It was 89.
I'm sorry?
I think it was 1980.
Sorry, you're right, 1989. And were exonerated after some of them decades in prison. Ava DuVernay is one of the most important filmmakers of our time, not just because of the stories she tells, but because of the people she hires to tell them, both in front of and behind the camera. She's someone who really lives what she speaks. But this film makes real the human cost of systemic oppression in so many ways. And there are people in this film, if they're not characters, these folks are playing real people that are alive today. The people in this film will cause all of us to reckon with the systems that we support, even unwittingly, right? Because every time you buy that coffee cup that was made by an inmate, you are supporting that mass incarceration, whether or not you voted for the person who appointed that police commissioner and that warden, right? And it forces, that film forces a reckoning, and I've told white people in particular, even if you have read all of the books and authors that I just listed, even if you went and did an audit of your books at the shelf of your social media, and you added all of those other voices, even if you did all of that, you still need to go watch this film.
Okay, this question states simply, could you speak on how you feel technology and media will continue to influence social movements?
Great question. The power that we found of social media and new media in particular during the Ferguson uprising was that we retained the power to tell our own stories. So it was fascinating because there would be days when somebody would be at home watching CNN, and then they text somebody who was on the street, they say, you know, on CNN, they're saying y'all are looting and y'all are doing this, y'all are doing that, they're not telling the truth. And the person who would get the text, the protesters would go and literally unplug the CNN camera. And then say, you don't get to go back on air until you tell them the truth. And so, I mean, I'm serious, these things really happened. And they happened because people were fundamentally done with a narrative being spun that criminalized the people who were actually standing up against the criminals, right? Dr. King said that a riot is the language of the unheard. So what folks decided to do with social media is make sure that we're heard. So we could take to Twitter, we could take to Vine when it exists, and we could live stream something on Periscope so that before you tell the lie, we have already shown the video of the truth. Wrestling that narrative back is all about power. It's not just about retweets, it's not just about a number of followers. It is fundamentally about the power to define yourself for yourself, lest you be crunched into other people's fantasies for you and eaten alive, which is what Roger Wood said, right? If we let the narrative get away from us, then we would have let the movement get away from us. And all of our power to create any change would have been lost in that moment. So we knew how critical owning the narrative was in that moment, and we see that all across the country. We see that with the Me Too hashtag. We see that with Arab Spring. We see that all across the world. This is part of the reason why now in the Sudan, all but one internet provider is shut down. Because folks understand the power of social media and social movements, and they want to ensure that the crimes that are being committed against the Sudanese people are not visible to the rest of the world, and they want us to move on and not pay any attention, which is why we have to take to our social media, we have to tell the stories, we have to make sure that the media is telling the truth. I think though, what we always have to remember is that social media is rented space. So one of the platforms we used often was Vine. Vine was something where you created these very short video clips and they could go up instantly on multiple platforms. Vine was owned by Twitter and it was shut down. And suddenly people who told their stories exclusively through Vine no longer had a platform to tell their stories because they were operating on rented space. So what I truly want to see is for us to leverage the platforms that we can build on social media and then go and create the media empires and platforms of our own volition that we need to tell our stories no matter who's in charge, right? I'm really obsessed with ownership right now. I'm really obsessed with the fact that Oprah can tell the stories the way she wants to tell them because she's got her own network and she doesn't have to negotiate with anybody to do it, right? I'm obsessed with the fact that Byron Allen, who has been a black television maker for a long time, has now been approved by the Supreme Court for his lawsuit to be seen because what he was saying was that cable companies are not giving the same kind of offers to black-run television studios that they're giving to white companies, and that this is fundamental racism and bias. So social media is powerful, but it is always limited because there's always somebody else's space and we are just renting it. So we have to have a long-term vision about how we create permanent spaces for our storytelling, our narratives, and our identities.
All right, the next question. Do you see emotional intelligence as a solution to the social issues of today in St. Louis and other cities? How do we get this tool in the schools?
That's a great question. Emotional intelligence is critical. So one of the pieces, the fundamental education pedagogy that I believe in is called culturally responsive pedagogy. It's created by a black woman named Gloria Louisan. She's an education professor and researcher out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And culturally responsive pedagogy essentially says that three things need to stand alongside each other in the classroom. One is academic rigor, that all young people would need the skills to do their best work. Two is critical consciousness, so they need to understand the world around them and how they might use those skills to help change the world. The third piece though, and this gets to this question about emotional intelligence, is cultural confidence. So many of our young people enter the school building and everything that they are internalizing is the idea that they are wrong. That the way that they speak is wrong, that the zip code they come from is wrong, that the home they come from is wrong, that the country they immigrated from is wrong, that who they love is wrong. When you ingest those stories and you internalize these ideas about yourself, you can lack the emotional wherewithal and the confidence to go and use the skills that you're getting in the classroom and apply them to the world that you're conscious about. The third leg of that stool is often missing because it's the hardest thing to figure out how to do. Honestly, if I'm an educator and my own emotional intelligence was stunted, then it's going to be hard for me to teach that to someone else. And often in the places where we train teachers, we are not emphasizing that kind of tripart work. So I think it's critically important, and I think especially when we put it in the context of culturally responsive pedagogy, it has the power to fundamentally shift education as we know it.
You spoke of people voting and then holding their elected officials accountable. How will you mobilize people to fight the active suppression of their votes?
Ooh, ain't this the question? We had a whole different governor in Georgia and probably Florida if we could have figured that out. This this is part of the reason why I bring up organizations like Arc City Defenders, like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, like the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights out of Washington, D.C. Those are the folks that do the quiet litigation work. And the litigation work are the lawsuits that are that move through the courts to make sure that things like the exact match law, which is what was used by one of the things that was used by Brian Kemp in Georgia to disenfranchise voters, can't see the light of day, right? Part of the challenge is that even sometimes the litigation can only be reactive because somebody has to do the bad thing for us to create the lawsuit against them in the first place. And so part of, I think, what we need to be well-rounded in our strategy about is thinking about who we are running for all of those offices that aren't sexy, right? So who are we running for Secretary of State? Who are we running for the positions that appoint the election commissioners? Who are we running for all of those little roles that are like not congressperson, they're not alderperson, they're not mayor, they're not governor, but they matter deeply? The other thing is we just have to engage in a serious level of political education. So I had gone down to Georgia to stump for Stacey Abrams. It was Morehouse Spelman homecoming weekend. So in other words, it was lit. And everybody was very engaged and very excited. And it was like, vote for Stacey everywhere, right? But one of the things we had to do is we were passing out leaflets to college students would say, if you show up to your polling place and are turned away, here are your rights. Right? If you are told the polling place is closed so anybody in line from here on can't vote, that is a lie from the pit of hell, stay in line, right? We had to be able to educate people about their rights so that they could be empowered to exercise that single right to vote. And then to be ready for whatever would come. So I was talking to folks from Stacey Abrams' campaign a couple of weeks before she was before Election Day, and one of her senior staffers was telling me that they started off the campaign with one lawyer, and I think by the time I was talking to her, they had close to 50, because they were ready. They knew the challenges were coming. They knew that the voter machines were going to be broken. They knew that something, a pipe was going to bust at one of the polling places, and it was going to be shut. They knew all of this was going to happen, so they were ready. And sometimes we are so busy reacting to things that we're not being strategic and proactive about how to be ready for what we know will come. And so I think it's about us funding those kind of efforts. Don Calloway, who's from St. Louis and also lives in DC, created the National Voter Protection Action Fund. I'm on the board for that. And every single cent that we raise, it's disseminated to grassroots organizations that fight for the protection of the vote on the ground. So we give it directly to the places that we know are most at risk. Ohio, Georgia, Florida, Missouri. We want to make sure that the people on the ground who are doing that level of education, who are doing that level of engagement, actually have the resources to do it well.
What is your opinion about this? We need a police advisory board which acts as a liaison between citizens and police rather than one that hides in the PD, I believe is what it says.
Yeah.
And only their internal affairs.
Got you. Well, we know the police can't police themselves. That should be a fundamental basic understanding in this room, I think. And I think that can be a positive step. Here's what I want to encourage in us, though. I was telling a presidential candidate who shall not be named the other day that part of what I'm disturbed by in this moment is that we assume a level of political will that then dictates the amount to which we are willing to have political imagination. Here's what I mean by that. There's so many things that we have already written off as possibilities. We've already said this can happen, that won't happen, these folks will never vote for this, these folks will never go for that. That we stop ourselves and limit ourselves from imagining what's possible. So what would it look like for police forces actually to be very minimal if they existed at all? Are we willing to dream that big? Are we willing to actually go down the road of imagining what it would look like for neighbors to be protecting one another? What would it actually look like for us to be creating citizen safety boards, right, instead of calling 911? I know it feels like the wildest thing. Should that actually be something that we should be thinking about? Is that actually possible? But if we at least go through the exercise of imagining what's possible, then we can plan backwards from the dream and actually start to figure out the road to it, right? Yes, an advisory board or a citizens review board that has real subpoena power, these are important initial solutions, right? But we also have to be willing to be imaginative enough to think about the bold solutions. When we created Campaign Zero, we decided to call it Campaign Zero because we believe that we can live in a world where the police don't kill people. It is that simple to us. And when we say that to people, so many people that we say that to say, no, the police will always kill someone. There will always be someone who has this issue or that issue, and therefore, no, we didn't name it Campaign 10%, or Campaign Fewer, or Campaign Less Than Last year. We need to Campaign Zero. Because if we are not willing to imagine that big, then the solutions that we create will always have limitations on them. So yes, Campaign Zero has some really important initial steps, but a lot of the things that we're trying to dream are bigger than these initial steps. And I think that can be a solution, but we can't ever get limited about these initial solutions. We always have to be willing to imagine and to push the envelope. There are so many people who could not imagine the world that we are living in, but they fought for it anyway. And I'm grateful for the folks who fought for a world that they may never live to see, but that they were brave enough to imagine.
Tell us about the police scorecards and what will it take to bring them here?
So the police scorecard, we've done a number of research projects on Campaign Zero because we think that part of the necessary framework of creating a world where the police don't kill people is having strong and honest data. And that is data that we can't rely on the government to get for us, because if they were going to do it, they would have done it by now. So we have gone out and gotten that data for ourselves. So we've done everything from doing FOIA requests for police union contracts with the 100 largest cities in the country, and identifying themes that actually prevent community justice. We've done that. We've done a number of scorecards of the use of force policies in the 100 largest cities in the country, including St. Louis City and County, because we know that there are 8 use of force policies that if all 8 are employed, dramatically reduce the number of police incidences. And Baton Rouge actually stepped up to be the very first city that actually adopted all 8 of those after the killing of Alton Sterling. But the latest project that we did is a police scorecard, and we did it across the state of California. So we looked at every single police department in California and scored them on a whole host of things. So use of force, the police union contract, how many folks they're killing, if those folks are disproportionately people of color, et cetera, et cetera. We are 3 people with laptops and a Slack group of really zealous volunteers. So getting a state like California to research that much took a great deal of effort from a small group of people. In part because we really actually haven't raised a lot of money for Campaign Zero. We wanted to keep the operation pretty lean, and there's so many organizations that need resources and we didn't want to block those. But whoever asks the question should come and see me later so that we can exchange contact information and we can figure out what's possible.
You mentioned the importance of culturally responsive teaching and trauma-informed care. Could you expand on your experience working with Teach for America and how that program could improve?
Yes, and I'm going to do it by embarrassing someone. Hi, Samantha. Because she drove right up to her. So this is Samantha Lurie. Sam, how long have you been at the V?
11 years.
So Samantha has been teaching at Louisan High School for 11 years.
Wow.
She came from Michigan, to St. Louis, and has been at the V for 11 years. Every single year, she takes students to Costa Rica. And Sam has taught, you have taught disabled students, you taught, which science? Biology. And so students who were told by so many other people that they have all the limitations in the world, was seen by Sam as what she calls at promise. Not at risk, but at promise. So she takes her at-promise students every single year to Costa Rica, and they fundraise, and when the fundraiser comes out next year, I need y'all to go to the Chipotle on Brand, buy those burritos so they can raise some money, so they can go to Costa Rica, and they go down there and they do community service, they do science experience, they eat food that they've never eaten before. They clearly travel to a place that many of them could not even imagine they'd be. And Sam is an example of what is possible when folks have commitment and vision and actually find the value in investing in young people like the ones that we serve, right? So Sam is not only our program, but of committed educators. I'll tell one more story. I've been in a number of graduations these last few months. Anybody follows me on social media, graduation season is my favorite season. It is just like, there's just so much joy. And what I love about graduation season is, it does not matter how old you are or how young you are, but when you are coming to see someone graduate that you love, you put so much care into how you show them. I mean, I'm seeing like grandmas coming in church hats, and kids coming in bow ties, and I'm like, people are so excited for this moment because they knew the sacrifice that it took. One of the graduations I went to, was here at Washington, is two of our folks from the Ferguson Uprising graduated, Caleb Reed and Alexis Templeton. Fantastic moment. But I also went to a graduation at Howard University. And one of the young people who walked across the stage was actually a young man I met who stood up in a Ferguson Commission meeting. And during our open mic time, it was one of the meetings that was about education. We were at one of the Hazelwood Middle Schools, which is the school district where he had originally gone. And he stood up, and the solutions that he presented as a sophomore, junior in high school were better than the three adults that had gone before him. So I, of course, piped up in my chair. And then he goes, "Teach for America saved my life." And I was like, "Run that back, please." And I record you, can you say that in front of all my donors? His name is Clifton King. And he talked about a young man named Michael Vargas, who grew up in Texas, also came to St. Louis through our program, and was his 8th grade history teacher. And the two of them are from different backgrounds, completely different parts of the country. But Clifton talked about the way in which Mr. Vargas not only made history come alive, but ensured that all of his young people saw themselves playing a part in history, right? This is what I mean about culturally responsive pedagogy. It is not just about providing the academic rigor and the skills, but about providing a consciousness of the world so that you fundamentally understand it and the role that you can play in changing it, and then giving you the confidence to go out and take those skills and actually change the world. And so here is Clifton, someone who has been organizing young people during the Ferguson Uprising, who created his own organization, who got funding for it, all while he had lost his mother from breast cancer, trying to help his siblings persist through school, working to persist through school himself, and standing here at the Ferguson Commission, giving the rest of us instructions on how to get it together. So I talked to him afterwards, and I'm like, I know Mr. Vargas. And he's like, oh my, he's like, I'm talking about my son. And what a powerful thing to think of your teacher that way. And so Clifton and I have stayed close, and he came to DC, went to Howard, pledged Alpha Phi Alpha, studied political science, graduated a few weeks ago, and is now going to be a Teach for America program. So when we get it right, when we emphasize culturally responsive pedagogy, when we start with the value of our young people, when we see them as at promise instead of at risk, that is when we unlock the power and potential of what schools can do when we stop schooling young people and start educating them. And so when I think of Samantha, when I think of Clifton, I think about the possibility of our program and more broadly of our schools and of education at its best. Because these are folks who are saying, I'm going to invest in the very places where people say nothing can grow, and I'm going to prove you wrong.
All right. Okay, any other questions? One more.
Oh my gosh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. One of our Teach for America young people, and a person who is now working in education herself, Septisha is here. Septisha is one of his little students. She went to College and is now right back here in St. Louis. So
Okay, so I'm told this is our last question, and the question is this: when will we be able to vote for you?
I appreciate that question. I take it as a compliment. The true answer is I don't know if or when. And I say that because, and I'm truly honored and humbled by the question. And whenever someone asks me that, I take it as an expression of trust. So I don't want to treat that lightly. But I also want to complicate and challenge our notion of what's possible when we stop looking for heroes. You don't need to vote for me for the world to change, right? I am, one of the people I've gotten to know over the last few years is Valerie Jarrett. Here's a woman who never ran for anybody's office, was deeply influential in the world as we know it, was deeply influential in police reform, was deeply influential in marriage equality, someone who is helping to do a lot of things, and in her role was making sure that the White House was actually the people's house, and bringing in perspectives and inviting folks in to have their voices heard that never would have been seen by another president or another administration. We are actually, truly, the ones that we have been waiting for. I'm not the one you've been waiting for. Your neighbor is the one you've been waiting for. You're the one I've been waiting for. I think about this life as a play. Everybody has their lines, and there's a script if we're going to get to the end, where we actually see all of the things that we want to be true come true. And if you don't read your lines, and I don't read my lines, the plot can't move. The play can't go in the intended direction. We can't actually get to the end that we all desire. So I appreciate the compliment, but I'm not the hero we're looking for. We have to be the heroes that we're looking for.
Brittany has a book coming out.
Yes.
Can we talk about that real quickly, and then we have to turn the floor over to Barbara, or she's going to get us. We're over time.
Okay, you have to be patient because we're in the editing process right now, but I've been spending the last few years collecting and curating the speeches of Black women that have become like a social justice Bible for me. I believe that Black women have given us so much wisdom and exhibited so much courage that we need to learn from in a time such as this. And so it is a collection of curated speeches and sermons, one of which comes from my mother, and personal essays for me in a book tentatively titled We Are Like Those Who Dream. It should be out next April, and hopefully we'll make sure we come back to say Louisan on a book tour.
Two intelligent, committed, passionate, engaged women have conversations like this all the time. Brittany Packnett and Shirley Washington, you were fabulous. Thank you so much.